It was a cold morning in Oxfordshire, England. The year was 1885. Inside a grand, old house called Blenheim Palace, a young boy sat near a window, staring outside. His name was Winston Leonard Spencer Churchill, and he was only 11 years old. The other boys at his school thought he was strange. He wasn't very good at sports. He wasn't even the best student in class. His teachers often complained. "Winston talks too much," they said. "He doesn't listen. He daydreams. He's always in trouble." But Winston didn't care. While the other boys played cricket, he sat under trees with books, dreaming of battles, heroes, and faraway lands. One afternoon, after being scolded again, Winston ran to the library at school. He opened a book about British history. His eyes lit up. "One day," he whispered to himself, "I will be a soldier. I will be a leader. I will help my country when it needs me." But that dream felt far away. Winston's parents were rarely home. His father, Lord Randolph Churchill, was a powerful politician, often too busy for his son. His mother, Jenny, was a beautiful American woman who loved parties and travel. Winston longed for their attention. He wrote letters to them, hoping for a reply. Sometimes he waited weeks. Still, he never gave up. He kept writing, kept reading, kept imagining a future where he mattered. Years passed, and Winston grew. At age 20, he finally joined the British Army. His first post was in India, a land full of color, heat, and conflict. There, in a small tent lit by oil lamps, he wrote letters, books, and thoughts about the world. "I am not afraid of danger," he once told a friend. "If I am to die, let it be with purpose." In 1899, while working as a war reporter in South Africa during the Boer War, Winston's train was ambushed by enemy fighters. Bullets flew. Men screamed. Smoke filled the air. Winston jumped from the train, trying to help the wounded. But suddenly, a rifle clicked behind his back. He turned slowly. A soldier was pointing a gun at his head. The cold metal of the rifle pressed against Winston's back. "Turn around," said the Boer soldier sharply. Winston raised his hands and turned slowly. His heart was pounding, but his face stayed calm. He was now a prisoner of war. Winston was taken to a prison camp in Pretoria, the capital of the Boer Republic. The walls were high. The guards were strict. The barbed wire cut across the sky like sharp teeth. Inside the camp, the food was bad. The beds were hard. Time moved slowly. But Winston's mind never rested. "I cannot stay here," he whispered to himself at night. "I was not born to sit in a cage." He studied the guards. He memorized the routines. He listened carefully to their footsteps, their voices, their habits. Day by day, a plan began to form. It was dark. The guards had just finished their rounds. The other prisoners were asleep. Winston waited behind a pile of wooden crates near the edge of the camp. He had no map, no food, no weapon, only his courage. He looked around once more, and then, with one quick movement, he climbed over the wall. His heart raced as he ran into the night. Every step took him farther from the prison and closer to freedom. But danger followed close behind. The Boers were hunting for him. His face was on posters. His name was on every soldier's lips. Winston had to hide in bushes, drink dirty water from rivers, and beg for help in secret. For 3 long weeks, he walked through enemy territory with nothing but hope. Finally, he reached safety, a coal mine run by British workers. They helped him escape by hiding him in a train car filled with sacks of wool. When he returned to England, he was a hero. Newspapers printed his face. Crowds cheered. He had not only survived, he had escaped and told the world about it. But Winston didn't rest. He had seen war. He had seen injustice. And he had something to say. In the year 1900, Winston Churchill stood on a wooden platform in front of a crowd. He was no longer just a soldier. He was a candidate for Parliament. "My name is Winston Churchill," he said, "and I am here to serve the people." The boy who once talked too much in school was now ready to speak for his country. But many still doubted him. "He's too young," they said. "He's too proud. He's just a storyteller." But Winston smiled. He knew his story was just beginning. It was the year 1900. The room was hot, crowded, and full of noise. Men in dark suits sat on wooden benches, some whispering, others shouting. This was the House of Commons, the heart of the British government. And standing there, nervous but proud, was Winston Churchill, just 25 years old, one of the youngest members ever elected to Parliament. Winston stood to speak. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice was firm. "Mr. Speaker," he began, "I rise today not as a boy, but as a man who has seen the world. Some laughed. Too young, someone muttered. He thinks war makes him wise. But Winston didn't stop. He had learned long ago, when people doubt you, speak louder with your actions. He studied harder than anyone. He stayed up late, reading laws, letters, and speeches from history. While others rested, Winston prepared. Winston had one powerful gift, his voice. He didn't just speak. He painted pictures with his words. He made people feel. He made them think. We make a living by what we get, he once said. But we make a life by what we give. People began to listen. Slowly, the laughter stopped. He traveled the country, giving speeches, meeting workers, talking to farmers, soldiers, and factory women. He didn't always agree with the government. In fact, he often challenged his own party. I speak not only for those in power, he told a crowd. I speak for those who have no voice. In 1904, something surprising happened. Winston left the Conservative Party, the party he was born into, and joined the Liberals, the party of change. People were shocked. He's a traitor, some said. He changes sides too easily. But Winston believed in ideas more than loyalty to one group. He believed that politics should serve the people, not just tradition. I would rather be right than be consistent, he said. And again, he pushed forward, unafraid, unshaken. In 1908, at just 33 years old, Winston became a government minister. His job? To help fix the problems of the poor. He visited coal miners who worked in darkness for pennies a day. He saw children with no shoes, no school, and no food. And he acted. Winston helped pass laws to protect workers. He pushed for pensions for the elderly and meals for hungry schoolchildren. Not everyone liked these changes. Some said he was moving too fast. But Winston didn't back down. By 1911, he had become the first Lord of the Admiralty, in charge of the Royal Navy, the most powerful fleet in the world. It was a great honor, a sign that Winston had truly arrived. But across the sea, trouble was brewing. In the heart of Europe, tensions were rising. Armies were growing. Nations were choosing sides. And soon, the world would be pulled into a war like no other. Winston didn't know it yet, but his greatest test was coming. A war that would shake the world and nearly destroy his career. The year was 1914. Europe was trembling. In the streets of London, newspapers shouted the news. Germany declares war. Britain mobilizes the navy. And behind the heavy doors of the British Admiralty, Winston Churchill stood at a large table covered in maps, his eyes fixed on the coastlines of Europe. He was now First Lord of the Admiralty, the man in charge of the British Navy. At just 39 years old, Winston had reached one of the most powerful positions in the country. War has come, he whispered. We must be ready. A man of action. Winston didn't wait. He moved quickly, ordering ships, supplies, and sailors into place. He visited warships in person. He inspected guns and met the crews. You will be our shield, he told the sailors. And our hope. At first, things looked good. The Navy was strong. Morale was high. But Winston wasn't satisfied. He wanted to do more. He wanted to strike fast and hard. And that desire would soon lead to one of the greatest mistakes of his life. The Gallipoli Plan. In early 1915, Churchill had an idea. Attack the enemy through a weaker front. Instead of fighting Germany directly in the trenches of France, he believed they could break through by attacking Turkey, Germany's ally, through a narrow sea passage called the Dardanelles. His plan was bold, daring, risky. One great push, he said, and we could change the course of the war. The government agreed. The mission was called the Gallipoli Campaign. And then it began. It started with hope. British and Allied ships entered the waters near Gallipoli. Thousands of soldiers, including men from Australia and New Zealand, the Anzacs, landed on the beaches. But they were not prepared. The cliffs were steep. The enemy was ready. The land was full of traps, and the heat was unbearable. Bullets rained down. Men fell. Weeks turned into months. The beaches became graves. Why did this happen? People cried. Who is responsible for this disaster? And the answer, many believed, was Winston Churchill. Back in London, the newspapers turned against him. Churchill must resign. Gallipoli, a bloody failure. The public was angry. The politicians were furious. Soldiers and families demanded answers. Winston tried to explain. He said the plan had potential. He said others shared the blame. But it didn't matter. He was forced to resign. The man who had once stood tall in Parliament, the hero of South Africa, the voice of the people, was now silenced. For the first time in his life, Winston Churchill was truly alone. But Winston was not a man to hide. While others stayed in London, he joined the army and went to the Western Front in France. There, in the cold mud of the trenches, among rats, bombs, and fear, he led a group of soldiers as a battalion commander. Gone were the suits and speeches. Now, he wore a soldier's coat and carried a gun. He wrote letters to his wife, painted to calm his mind, and watched as young men died around him. "I have seen too much death," he wrote, "but still I believe in life." By 1917, the war was dragging on, and Winston slowly returned to politics, but carefully. He took a smaller role, working behind the scenes. Many still did not trust him. But Churchill, as always, waited, watched, prepared. "One day," he told a friend, "my time will come again." What he didn't know was that the darkest storm in human history was still to come. And when that storm arrived, the world would turn to him. The year was 1930. The world was changing again, but not for the better. Winston Churchill, once a powerful voice in British politics, was now on the outside. His speeches were ignored. His warnings were laughed at. Many thought he was finished. He lived quietly, writing books, painting countryside scenes, and spending time with his wife Clementine and their children. But in the distance, a storm was building. In Germany, a new leader had come to power, Adolf Hitler. He spoke with fire, promised strength, blamed others for the country's problems. At first, many in Britain and Europe did not take him seriously. But Winston did. He read Hitler's book. He listened to his speeches. And what he saw terrified him. "This man is not just dangerous," Winston warned. "He is preparing for war." But few listened. The world was tired of fighting. The scars of World War I were still fresh. People wanted peace, even if it meant closing their eyes. "Let us give Hitler what he wants," some said. "Then maybe he will stop." But Winston stood up in Parliament and shouted, "You cannot reason with a tiger when your head is in its mouth." Still, he remained out of power, until the world could no longer ignore the truth. On September 1st, 1939, Hitler invaded Poland. 2 days later, Britain declared war on Germany. Church bells rang across the country, not in celebration but in warning. The nightmare had returned. Winston was brought back into government. Once again, he became First Lord of the Admiralty. The Navy prepared for war. But Britain's leadership was weak. People were afraid. The Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, had lost the trust of the nation. And then, in May 1940, everything changed. The Nazis were moving fast, through Belgium, the Netherlands, and into France. Britain stood alone. On May 10, 1940, King George VI called Winston Churchill to Buckingham Palace. In a quiet room, the king looked him in the eye and said, "Mr. Churchill, I ask you to form a government." Winston nodded. He understood the weight of those words. He was now Prime Minister, in Britain's darkest hour. That night, he walked alone through the halls of 10 Downing Street. The windows were blacked out. The air was tense. He lit a cigar and said softly, "I hope it is not too late. I hope we are not too late." The next day, Winston stood before Parliament, and before history. His voice was clear. His message was unshakable. "I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall never surrender." The people listened, and for the first time in many months, they believed. In the darkness, Winston's words became a light. He was not just a leader now, he was the soul of a nation under fire. But the war was far from over. Bombs would fall. Cities would burn. Enemies would grow stronger. And Winston would have to face not only the enemy across the sea, but fear, doubt, and danger within his own country. The year was 1940. Nazi tanks had rolled into France. Cities were falling. The world was watching and waiting, but Britain stood alone. Across the English Channel, German planes prepared for attack. Hitler believed the British people would break. He believed they were tired, weak, afraid. But he had not counted on one thing: Winston Churchill. In the skies above southern England, the air was filled with the sound of engines and sirens. Day after day, German Luftwaffe bombers crossed the Channel to attack. They targeted factories, airfields, even schools and homes. Fires lit up the night sky. Families hid in basements and underground train stations. But the British pilots, some of them just teenagers, took to the skies in their small fighter planes. They became known as the Few, and Winston stood behind them. He gave speeches on the radio, not to frighten, but to strengthen. He didn't lie. He didn't pretend things were easy. But he gave people something greater than comfort. He gave them courage. Never in the field of human conflict, he said, was so much owed by so many to so few. His words echoed through every home. Even as bombs fell, people repeated them. The attacks didn't stop. In September 1940, Hitler began a new campaign, the Blitz. Night after night, German bombers dropped explosives on London, Liverpool, Coventry, and other cities. Families lost homes. Streets were turned to rubble. But the people of Britain did not run. They refused to give up. And Winston Churchill was always there, walking through bombed neighborhoods, shaking hands with firemen, speaking to children in shelters. "We can take it," people told him. "We're still standing." Winston knew Britain could not win this war alone. He needed help. Across the ocean, in the United States, President Franklin D. Roosevelt listened carefully. At first, America stayed neutral. But Winston wrote letters. He made phone calls. He sent messages, not just with words, but with emotion. "Give us the tools," he said, "and we will finish the job." Roosevelt responded. Supplies began arriving. Weapons, ships, food. And slowly, hope returned. By 1941, Britain had survived the worst. Hitler had failed to invade. The British people, bruised but unbroken, had made a stand. And then came news that would change everything. In December 1941, after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States finally joined the war. Churchill was overjoyed. "So we had won after all," he said. "We had won the war. England would live." But even then, he knew the hardest part was still ahead. With America in the war, a new alliance was formed. Churchill, Roosevelt, and Joseph Stalin of the Soviet Union. The three would not always agree. There would be secrets, suspicion, and strategy. But together, they would begin to push back against Hitler. And as Winston flew across continents, planned invasions, and faced the pressure of total war, he carried a heavy weight. He was no longer just fighting for victory. He was fighting for the future of freedom itself. The year was 1942. Winston Churchill traveled across the world. He met with Franklin D. Roosevelt in secret meetings on ships and in remote houses. They talked about strategy, about plans to defeat Hitler. Later, Churchill met Joseph Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union. Stalin was fierce and serious, but Churchill knew he was a necessary ally. "We may not trust each other," Churchill said, "but we must work together to stop a greater evil." The war was fought on many fronts. In North Africa, British and American soldiers fought against German forces led by the brilliant General Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox. Winston followed the battles closely, sending encouragement to the troops. "We cannot lose the deserts," he said. "Victory there means hope." After North Africa, the Allies invaded Italy in 1943. It was a difficult fight. Mountains, rivers, and fortified towns made every step hard. Winston knew Italy's victory was important, but it was just part of a larger plan. The real goal was to open a new front, Western Europe, and prepare for the biggest battle yet. By 1944, plans were underway for a secret invasion. The code name was Operation Overlord. Thousands of ships, planes, and soldiers gathered in England. Winston worked day and night with his generals, helping to organize the attack. The goal was simple but terrifying: land on the beaches of Normandy, France, and begin to push Hitler's forces back. The world waited. The fate of Europe and freedom hung in the balance. As June approached, the weather grew worse. Storms battered the coast. Soldiers trained and waited. Winston gave speeches to encourage the people. "The eyes of the world are upon us. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with us." D-Day, the beginning of victory. The date was June 6, 1944. The morning was dark, cold, and stormy. Thousands of soldiers waited quietly on ships, rocking on the choppy sea. Winston Churchill stood on the shore of southern England, watching the fleet leave. He knew this day was one of the most important in history. This was D-Day, the largest sea invasion ever. More than 150,000 Allied soldiers from America, Britain, Canada, and other countries were about to storm the beaches of Normandy, France. They faced heavy defenses, mines, walls, soldiers ready to fight to the death. The success or failure of the invasion could change the course of the war. Early in the morning, planes dropped soldiers behind enemy lines. Then, ships began landing troops on 5 beaches, codenamed Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. The fighting was fierce. At Omaha Beach, American soldiers faced the strongest resistance. Many fell in the sand, but they kept moving forward. Churchill listened to reports. He knew the cost would be high, but he also knew the world was watching. By the end of the day, the Allies had secured the beaches. It was only the beginning, but it was a victory. Churchill spoke on the radio that night. His voice was strong but humble. "This is not the end, nor even the beginning of the end," he said. "But it is, perhaps, the end of the beginning." The war would continue for months. Cities still lay in ruins. Many more lives would be lost. But hope was alive. After D-Day, the Allies pushed deeper into France. They liberated Paris in August 1944. Winston visited the city, greeted by cheering crowds. But the war was far from over. The German army was retreating, but still dangerous. The Allies prepared for the final battle, the march toward Berlin, the heart of Nazi Germany. After the success of D-Day and the liberation of Paris, the Allies faced one last desperate challenge. In December 1944, Hitler launched a surprise attack in the dense forests of the Ardennes, a region in Belgium. The goal was to split the Allied forces and capture the vital port of Antwerp. The battle was fierce and brutal. American soldiers fought through freezing cold and heavy snow. For weeks, the Germans pushed forward, creating a bulge in the Allied lines. But the Allies held on. Winston watched the news carefully, sending messages of support. "We must never lose hope," he told the country. "Even in the darkest hour, we stand firm." By early 1945, the Allies were ready for the final push. They crossed the Rhine River and entered the heart of Germany. Cities were destroyed. Millions of people suffered. The Nazi regime was falling apart. On May 7, 1945, Germany surrendered. The war in Europe was over. People celebrated in the streets. Bells rang out. Winston Churchill gave a speech, full of relief and hope. "This is your victory," he said to the British people. "But the work is not finished. Peace must be won." The war had changed everything. Europe was in ruins. Millions were homeless. New powers were rising. The United States and the Soviet Union had become superpowers. Winston understood the world was entering a new and uncertain time. In 1946, Churchill gave a famous speech in the United States. He said that an iron curtain had fallen across Europe, a barrier between East and West. It was a warning of the coming Cold War. "From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic," he said, "an iron curtain has descended across the continent." After the war, Winston Churchill returned to Britain as a hero. But the people were tired of war. In 1945, they voted for a new government. Churchill lost his position as Prime Minister. It was a difficult moment for him. Though out of office, Churchill remained an important voice. He warned about the dangers of the Cold War and urged countries to work together for peace. He traveled the world, speaking about freedom, courage, and hope. Winston loved many things besides politics. He was a painter, filling his canvases with colors of the countryside. He was a writer, winning the Nobel Prize in Literature for his books on history and war. He was a family man, devoted to his wife Clementine and their children. Churchill returned as Prime Minister from 1951 to 1955. By then, he was older and tired but still determined. He worked for peace and tried to build a better world. In 1953, he was awarded the Order of the Garter, one of Britain's highest honors. Winston Churchill died in 1965 at the age of 90. His funeral was a national event. People from around the world remembered him as a great leader who stood strong in the darkest times. Churchill's words and actions continue to inspire. He showed that courage, determination, and hope can change the world. Success is not final, failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. And that is the story of Winston Churchill, a man who never gave up, even when the world was against him.